Today I'll dissect a 2021 game developed by Eidos and Fops, published by Humble Games. Namely Archvale. Archvale is a bullet hell RPG with a reasonably sized map to explore. It's a short game of 10 to 15 hours, but there's definitely enough to be said about it. So let's teleport into Archvale. Welcome to Thor's Games. This is a monologue video where I talk about games from the perspective of a designer and a gamer. Let's begin with the Archvale basics. What genre is bullet hell, for instance? In short, bullet hell are games that introduces millions of projectiles in fast-paced combat. They tend to look like this. I'll just chill here, I guess. With that sorted, what's the premise in Archvale? Well, you wake up as a child of Archvale, whatever that means. As this child, you carry the ability to kill the cursed, who were thought to be immortal, also known as bosses. Bosses like these were cursed to an eternal life of suffering by an evil king a long time ago. These bosses are scattered all over the world of the game, and of course, it's up to us to defeat all of them. Each boss protects a stone, not just any old grimy stone from your backyard, of course. No. These are the stones that are needed to assemble a legendary arch, which we will learn more about later. When not kicking the asses of one of the 7 bosses, we meet a cute bunch of vendors and professionals. There's the plum-loving chef, the money-gobbling but adorable pig banker, the eccentric antique dealer, and a few others. Then of course there's the crafting system. Crafting is central to the expanding of your arsenal. This crafting system is low effort, so you'll be creating flesh-tearing, blood-boiling munitions like it was a piece of cake. Actually, I think cake is more complex as it usually has more than 2 ingredients. On a general basis, the art style is pixelated but packed with details and colors. It does not add anything new to the industry, but it certainly holds up to my expectations. The visibility of enemies and their attacks was really good too, which is important for a bullet hell game. Moving over to the UI on the general level, it is extremely quick and responds well to your inputs. But that's basically where the good things ends for the UI. We'll have a more detailed look at that later. The music takes me right back to my childhood, delivering tunes reminiscent of Crash Bandicoot and Pokemon. Let's take a quick listen. I'm pretty certain that every area, every town, and every boss has its own tune, so it's quite impressive. As the genre suggests, this game engulfs the player in chaotic combat. In combat, the player will master different weapons, and we are introduced to an overwhelming range of them from the beginning. Weapons are divided into melee, ranged, and magical. As well as weapons, we have 3 stamina charges, which allows us to dash about and avoid damage. The simple combination of dashing, kiting, and shooting constitutes the essence of the gameplay. And yeah, there's the bomb too, although I didn't really use it. So combat is simple, just aim this excessively big crosshair at your enemy and fire. You can swap freely between up to 8 weapons in combat, which turned out to be grotesquely excessive. I used 2 weapons at the most. This kid must have been up to malicious and evil shenanigans in his past life. Why else would these adorable blobs with $1,000,000 smiles be on our backs? Cute blobs are just one of the enemies that we are confronted with. Each area in Archvale's medium-sized world features bunches of them. We have living plants, hostile fish, deadly scorpions, undead archers, warrior mushrooms, and... Santa? Is that you? Enemy designs are not recycled here either. All new areas offer fresh enemies that have been designed from the ground up, every time. On behalf of all gamers, good job. You'll be battling your way through the tiles on this map here. This colorful world introduces you to a plethora of areas. Sandy places, watery places, dank places, dark places, hot places, cold places. Most of the places have hordes of enemies that you need to kill in order to progress. If you die, and you will die a few times in Archvale, you'll lose half your fortune. Don't worry though, you can store it at the bank. Some tiles are fountains, where you restore your health and fast travel. Fountains reset enemies too in a Souls-like fashion. You can, for example, teleport to the towns that are scattered throughout the game, but the hub town of Fairreach will most likely be your best friend. It holds all the commodities you need, and it has the best town soundtrack. I really hope you did enjoy the sound effects in the background. The map itself, which you will be using to navigate in the world, offers very little advice on names of places, levels, cities or dungeons, and so on. Where the hell is the hub? You'll find it eventually. Conversely, the interesting events in the world are almost exclusively story-related, such as temples, bosses, and towns. There's nothing wrong with that, but due to the dynamic and open map, Archvale gave me the impression of being a game packed with explorative elements and activities outside of the main story. Besides the occasional chest or plum to boost your healing potions, there isn't really much to exploration in Archvale. You'll find the odd, uninteresting NPC, possibly put there when the developers realized how empty the world was.
I learned to be the crab.
Exploring in Archvale makes me think of dead ends, because that's often where you'll end up, in a nondescript dead end. I mean, look at this. We have dead ends that demand a lot from you to get to. Remember that each tile represents one room of enemies, and when you get there, it's more often than not empty. They could have connected the map better or featured some event, a boss, side quest, NPC. Let's look at the good sides of Archvale's relatively open world setting. You can more or less choose where to go next, making it possible to defeat the main quest bosses in your own order. This was a great liberty and a huge surprise, in that many games that have metroidvania-like maps usually constrain the player at every opportunity, and unlocks are necessary to progress. Archvale loves to defy genres and expectations, and although the exploration bits are repetitive, the action-packed gameplay is entertaining and it will keep you hooked. Let's dig into the boss temples. Inside the temples there are more difficult objectives. You'll still be battling your way through rooms of enemies, but other gimmicks such as finding keys and beating platforms are added to the list of chores. You'll also be gathering tablets to open doors, if that's your thing. At least we're getting some loot along the way. One temple was different and has the player battle in an arena instead. My favorite temple was the one close to Moralton, where I was put to the test and had to fend off waves of mushroom fighters and healers in a melancholic atmosphere. What made this fight so engaging was the perfect difficulty settings and a varied landscape that I could use to my advantage. At the end of each boss temple there's a boss, duh. I found them engaging in that they had an elevated difficulty level, cool moves, and for the most part kick-ass soundtracks. Among my favorite bosses was the Grove's Blight. It uses several phases and interesting bullet patterns. In the end, the bosses hardly feel like a true challenge. They are core milestones to complete in order to finish the main storyline, but yet they are easily forgotten, like the pop tracks of last year. Temples are easily raided and bosses are quite easily slain too, especially in the late game. It's tempting to compare this game with the Zelda franchise, and therefore I will do that. In Zelda, the temples and bosses are also the main milestones to complete in order to progress and finish the main storyline, and they are truly remembered, loved, and hated for their extensiveness and difficulty. Zelda and Archvale are two different games, but the premises are comparable. What could Archvale have done differently for temples and bosses to be remembered as they should? One of the things I will remember uniquely from boss fights in Archvale is the tactic of healing. Healing takes time, and the amount of time spent on chugging that plum-infused water will determine the amount of health points you get. The healing mechanic nudges us to search for the right moment to heal. Sometimes I'd heal up even at over half health just because it was the right moment to do so. This element of challenge is enough to spice up boss fights significantly. But let's get back to weapons. If you're playing with magic weapons, slain enemies drop magical shards. These shards improve the performance of magic weapons. Ever since I played Ratchet & Clank, I've been compelled by the idea where weapons improve with use. It's something I consider to be a valid alternative to grinding obnoxiously around the clock for new and better gear. Why not keep the same gear and level it up instead? It makes us more connected to the gear we own. It's immersive in my opinion. But alas, I was too early to draw that conclusion. It turned out that magical shards do not permanently improve your weapons with use. Magical shards provide a short buff that increases the fire rate of your magical weapons. With that cleared up, the magical shard mechanic would have been more helpful if I received data on stat increases for my weapons while picking up shards. It lacks a clear visual representation to help understand the change. Without this information, it's difficult to understand how well magic weapons perform versus the other weapon types. The lighthearted nature of Archvale comes to show in its music and art style, but it also shows in the aesthetic of weapons. You'll be able to use the likes of guns that shoot bee stingers, laser staves, rotating flails, blasters, and more. These unique styles of weapons is perhaps that which will draw you towards certain builds as well. Since this is a game of no classes, the builds you will be making revolves around weapons. That brings us over to Archvale's roleplay mechanics. Archvale has flexible RPG elements that lets you play the game your way and change things as you move along. How? First of all, it comes down to the lack of commitment the players have to make. Badges, which are the closest we'll get to abilities or skills in Archvale, gives you certain advantages, but they can be changed at any time. Therefore, complete liberty for players to play their own way. You do not have to be concerned for stats either, since stats are universally helpful. Armor and power increases are found when exploring, and they boost your proficiency no matter if you're a ranged weapon user or a magic weapon user. The biggest commitments you will be making into a particular build is when you spend money on upgrading weapons. They only go up to +5 though. Crafting gear to match a particular build is a commitment of sorts, but the crafting system is basically holding your hand so you can craft as much as you want. Turns out that the UI is the thing that will be the biggest antagonist for your builds. I for one don't know if I was missing something, but I could not wrap my head around the badge UI at first. I asked my friend too, yes, I have friends, and he couldn't understand either. Why were these badges there on the right? What information was I missing? Turned out you had to rest on a fountain to get your badges equipped. The badges on the right are equipped badges, whilst highlighted badges are chosen but not necessarily equipped. If you are inventing a new interaction pattern, it could do with some better explanation. Archvale places itself in the middle of a genre that is obsessed with grinding for gear, stat chasing, and number crunching. I often caught myself thinking, what is the most damage? What's the best strategy for beating the boss? And so on. Ultimately, I was overly concerned with the stats and the power. I risked neglecting the elements of joy or enjoyment, which are the feelings we should be getting out of playing, right? One of my university professors once told me that we are not interested in what the machine does, but what it produces. I believe that we can use that insight here too, because it's much more rewarding to consider how the different builds and gear will help you accomplish enjoyment as a player, rather than thinking about the gear itself. But of course, we get joy out of different things. I know gamers who genuinely loves to calculate the most damage effective build in game, and others who insist on playing Skyrim without fast travel. In reality, there lies no answer on what is joy in gaming. Players should reflect on what makes them happy, and then just go for it. In the hunt for enjoyment, I tried different builds to see which ones I liked the best. I tried going for an attack speed build. My accuracy was really low and I thought a higher attack speed might be more bang for the buck than damage. Also, I was curious to see if attack speed would allow me to use different kind of weapons, since attack speed is useful for all weapon groups. In the end, the gameplay lacked the variation and dynamics that was required for me to benefit from changing between weapons. I mean, in what situation would I need a bow versus a staff? It puzzled me. At one point I tried the ultimate anti-bullet hell build too. It was a simple bow that shot one arrow at a time with a low fire rate. It was kind of like driving a wheelbarrow in Need for Speed. After using several weapons simultaneously, I concluded that it was best focusing on one weapon at the time. I usually found my favorite weapon and stuck to it anyway. But Archvale's flexible model still allowed me to choose a new weapon independently of weapon type. If I wanted to be a mage, then I could change to a mage, and so on. I'm not sure how well balanced this game was. I played magic weapons early on, and immediately after changing to ranged weapons I completely ravaged the entire jungle temple, where I had made such a mess of myself as a magic user. In fact, often after changing to a new weapon, the difficulty level plummeted to the level of ridicule. This decline in difficulty became more and more extreme the further I progressed. A few good hours into the game, after changing back from ranger to mage again, I did something that should never happen in a boss-oriented game. I just completely shredded a main story boss to bits on the first try. So much so that I can show you the entire fight without making this video too long. Unfortunately, it's not only weapons that whisper unbalanced in the player's ears. These optional challenges that keep appearing are possibly the most difficult aspects of the game. In the challenges, you're tasked with dodging projectiles while catching a gem. Every challenge has 3 levels and you're rewarded with a badge at the end. In my opinion, these challenges are so difficult that they diminish the significance of the main story bosses. They create an unbalanced understanding of challenge, rendering bosses much easier to complete than certain challenges. Let's compare the difficulty of a boss to an orb challenge. I'll only be tracking death counts, and I'm sure there are better ways to make a comparison, but this will hopefully create an understanding of the discrepancies between difficulty. I'll make it easy on myself by simply comparing the most difficult boss with the most difficult orb challenge. I will speed things up now. I'll just show you the deaths now. After beating a challenge, your pulse will lower by about 20% and you'll get a badge. At least the feedback when acquiring loot is extremely well executed with animation and text. It clearly communicates to us that we're picking up something special. Let's look at the hardest boss fight then. That's how the fight looked like. Let's speed it up a little. We are looking at 48 deaths for the orb challenge and 5 deaths for the boss. Obviously, in challenges you are one shot, so deaths means less there. But it was still an overwhelming 10 times more deaths in the challenges than in the boss fight. I also calculated that I spent 7 minutes and 10 seconds on the challenge and around 6 minutes on the boss. Moving on to crafting. Crafting materials are abundant. You can pretty much craft what you want without moderation. It's actually nice that crafting is accessible. It lets you spend less time farming for gear. It also builds on your ability to change your arsenal and builds whenever you like. When you head into the crafting menu, you'll quickly notice that something funny is afoot. Comparing items in the crafting menu just doesn't work. How can we determine the difference between gear like this? Information is cluttered and impossible to read. Has this been tested at all? It's infuriating. The extent of UI breakdown does not stop there. I would ask to see the cost of crafting immediately. It's annoying and kind of absurd having to click onto items in order to determine the cost. Clicking every time makes it impossible to gain a good overview over the amounts of stuff you can craft. To top it off, there's no filter for different gear types, weapons, or rarities. This results in the player having to wade through heaps of irrelevant items every time they are crafting. As an added bonus, the storage chest also lacks filters for item types, making the storage box a living nightmare for most of us. But yeah, we were talking about crafting. I have a love-hate relationship with concepts of crafting in gaming. I'll start by saying that I enjoy it. As mentioned by Tracy Fullerton in my favorite book on game theory, it comes down to simple human biology. I, just as other humans, enjoy collecting things. Also, we are particularly fond of items that we have made ourselves through hard work. IKEA knows this, game designers knows this too, and they capitalize on it. I assume, or rather conspire, that this biological susceptibility is the primary reason for how crafting has gained ridiculous traction in the world of gaming. That's where the paradox comes in. I'm skeptical to crafting mechanics in light of the very same reasons. Perhaps I'm conservative, but sometimes it's enough to acquire gear through exploration, dumb luck, bosses, and quests. While crafting, you will notice the equipment color scheme. My first encounter with color schemes for gear was either in World of Warcraft or Torchlight. Usually they range from grey or white to orange. Stop the video on this schema if you're unfamiliar with the color grading of gear. Archvale takes color schemes to the next level. It's a puzzling thing. I think the best items have a disco color or something. I mentioned how I think we can circumvent crafting and attain gear through exploration, right? Items can be found through exploration, of course. They are easy to acquire. It's almost as if they have decided on delivering everything to players as long as they traverse the map. Chests are found in the middle of a room, so are the plums that you give to the eccentric chef to improve your healing potions. If there are secrets in the game, then they are so secret that I haven't found any yet. And trust me, I've been looking for hidden openings in walls. This is the story bit, and like always, it contains all of the spoilers. Archvale takes place on a beautiful yet troubled world. In this troubled world, cities proves to be safe havens for citizens of the different communities, but areas around the cities are plagued with dangerous beasts and crazed individuals. Something needs to change. The story is pieced together thanks to a robed monster called Maxilla, which also turns out to be the first boss of the game. Maxilla appears with historical facts after defeating each main boss. I was always suspicious of Maxilla. I'm prejudiced, but black robes with red details and sharp teeth lends me the impression that this Maxilla is, well, evil. As mentioned earlier, we are the child of Archvale. We don't know much about what it means, but we do know that we possess the power to defeat those who were placed under the spell of the Undying. This spell was cast on individuals despised by the corrupted king, a long time ago. A punishment worse than death, the spell forced those individuals to live under terrible conditions for eternity. These individuals now guard the stones that goes into the magical arch. But why are they guarding these artifacts? While killing bosses and collecting stones, we learn more about the king and the arch. The king seized the land for his own, which is pretty much what despotic kings like to do, so no surprises there. But the king's power corrupted him. Consequently, his subjects were suffering under his rule. In secrecy and desperation, people commenced construction of an arch. They believed that the arch would lead to a land without suffering, paradise, a land without the king's dark magic. After gaining knowledge of the arch, the king swept into the arch's construction chamber. Facing thousands of his subjects, he raised an ultimatum: follow my rule or die. His subjects denied his requests. This led to a deadly outburst. The king summoned unfathomable powers that left nothing but ashes. Maxilla, being at the king's side at the time of the outburst, realized that the king was fatigued and weak from using all his powers. Maxilla, who had seen the king's abuse of power and influence, decided to strike. Maxilla spent all his powers in order to trap the king inside the arch. The arch was disassembled. We have every reason to believe at this point that Archvale is in fact the realm on the other side of the arch. We, being the child of Archvale, is sent from there on a mission to rebuild the link between the two worlds. But why? Sounds rather malicious. It's natural to question the motives of our protagonist. Why does he want to rebuild the arch where a brutally power-hungry and ruthless king rests in eternal slumber? Is this the only solution? Are we evil? The corrupted king could now be locked away forever, at least with the right defensive strategy. Maxilla now personally made sure that the arch stones were secure. Those who wanted to seek out the stones were killed. Maxilla himself guarded one of the stones. He ordered the 6 other stones to be guarded by 6 cursed individuals. 6 immortal, yet cursed and insane bosses guarding the stones. What a line of defense, right? Maxilla is a nuanced character. Maxilla, who wants to protect the stones and prevent the arch from being constructed, presents us with storytelling and nuance. This is surprising because we are in the process of doing the antithesis of that, namely to rebuild the arch. It's as if Maxilla is trying to convince us not to continue with our quest by making us understand, by making us empathize with the old struggles of the world and the history of the old king's terrible rule. Too bad this kid is set on completing the mission. After defeating Maxilla and the 6 bosses, we are finally able to reach the construction chamber. This is where we'll see the glory of the arch. Maxilla tells us that the fate of the world is in our hands. We construct the arch, and there's the king. Kind of badass, actually. Maxilla resembles the king in his vestments. I'm assuming that he played a key role in the royal court. That was easy. I spent half the fight shooting at his hands, although that didn't work. Look at that damage. Oh my god, it's too much. It's so unbalanced. That was my first attempt at the final boss. I killed him on the second attempt. With the king out of the way, a gateway of sorts is established and the beautiful world we once knew is corrupted to the point of no return. The rationale of our character remains unclear, but as the child of Archvale, I interpret it in the following way. We were destined to open a link between this world and the world on the other side of the arch. This leads us to a gruesome and bleak union of the two worlds. It's not explicitly stated as a bad union, but all arrows point in that direction, judging from the visual language. I guess we were evil after all. Maxilla wasn't, so keep your prejudices at bay. Last note about the story. I'm not sure if the king was ever of importance for the child of Archvale. I'm guessing that the king was just an impractical barrier for us to be able to perform our duties and establish the link between the worlds. So for conclusion, Archvale is a beautiful game with fun and nostalgic music, set in a world where players can enjoy a selection of interesting enemies, weapons and areas. The classless and very flexible RPG system invites us to try many things and to find our own path. This type of flexible RPG component may even prove to be quite revolutionary and important, especially now that games are adapted by people of all ages and backgrounds, rendering it more difficult to find a one-size-fits-all solution. The story was present throughout the experience and definitely an element that motivated me to progress. I had issues understanding it completely while playing though. Maxilla recounted the history of the world in a clear way, but I could not wrap my head around the details. Maybe it was difficult understanding because we're always playing as the good guy. I always assume that we are up to do good, right? Archvale flips that around. Archvale does not come without its flaws though. The universe is rather shallow and repetitive, because the world is saturated with hordes of enemies. I am missing those moments where I'm connecting with the world. Unfortunately, the NPCs cannot help us in that department either. They are dumb and offer little to no insight into the daily life of the game's communities. Navigating can be clunky when information is missing from the map UI. This faulty UI is among many in Archvale. Other bad UI experiences include the sad storage menu, weird badge mechanics, and unusable item comparison. Finally, the bosses and temples are a mixed bag. Many temples are short and offer little solace from the fatigue of repetitive gameplay. Additionally, the puzzles or gimmicks are just too weak. There are many well-crafted boss fights, but at a general level, the unbalanced gameplay makes half of them effortless and thus unengaging. Thank you for watching.